Hello and welcome on behalf of myself, Darren Farwell, and my teammate,
Patrick Ross, hello.
To our second Ask Us Anything call. We're quite excited. We learned a little bit on the first one, looking forward to our call today. The Ask Us Anything, we send an email inviting you to send back your questions, and we'll do what we can as long as the questions are within our purview and appropriate.
Of course.
We'll do our best to answer them, and if they're not, well, we haven't run across that yet. So look forward to your questions. Patrick, when do we send out the questions?
So actually we send out the questions about 2 weeks in advance. We start soliciting questions. We follow up a week before the deadline with a reminder. And then we're taking questions really right up until that morning of doing the session.
Well, and we did get more questions this time than we got last time, which was nice. The questions this time were quite factual in nature, maybe not a surprise because it is the new year, so we've got RSP contributions to look after. Those people who are getting ahead of it, getting on top of it ahead of time, are doing TFSAs, and there were a few questions on that. Then we had another interesting question on target date funds. They were quite popular for a while, hadn't heard them as much, but anyway, we'll spend some time on that. So without any more further ado, I think, Patrick, the first question that we had was on TFSA. So why don't you tell us a little about the TFSAs?
Very good. TFSA stands for Tax-Free Savings Account, and it's a very powerful investment vehicle for investors today. And so people would like to know how much they can put into their TFSA this year. And luckily, the government's given us a great little bump up. We can now put in $6,000.
There, that's better. I can read that. I can read that better. I couldn't read it when you had there.
There we go. So $6,000 for 2018, or 2019 rather. So you can put...
When?
You can actually put 6,000 for 2019, not 2018.
Oh, you wrote 2018.
And I wrote 2018. So anyway, so that's 6,000 for 2019.
This is why sometimes it'd be nice to be able to rehearse these things. Okay, 2019.
2019. Okay.
$6,000.
6,000. So of course, you can put a total of, if you've never had a TFSA before, the total contribution room that you can put in is $63,500. Now, a lot of people ask, what happens if I take money out of my TFSA? Well, you actually, if you have room that year, you're allowed to put it back in. But if you've already maximized your TFSA, you've taken some out, you have to wait until the following calendar year. But no restrictions on taking money out, and very little restrictions on putting it back in, so it's a very powerful account.
So is the $63,500, does that include the $6,000 we're allowed to do in 2019?
It does.
Okay, so the most you are allowed to have contributed to your tax-free savings account is $63,500.
Correctly. Correct.
But hopefully you have more, because if you've been investing your money, it should be worth more than $63,500.
Definitely, that's right.
And I remember there was an article, I think it was the spring of 2018, where one of the writers in the Globe and Mail wrote an article about where your tax-free savings account should be based on the maximum contributions and earning money in the tax-free savings account. Now that was, as I said, early in 2018, so clearly doesn't include the contribution for 2019. But at that time he was saying something like $82,000.
Oh, yeah.
So if you've contributed your maximum to your tax-free savings account and that's made money for you, you should be somewhere around $82,000 if you want to be taking most advantage of it.
Correct. Now another account that's on people's minds is the RSP. Of course, the RSP deadline's coming up. It's tax time. It's very top of mind for people at the moment. So we thought
March 1st.
March 1st is the deadline. Yes. So you'll see here, you want to make sure that your 2018 contributions are in your RSP by midnight of March 1st. So keep that in mind. And a lot of people want to know how much can they put into their RSP. And generally, it's 18% of the earned income you've earned in 2018. So that's a rough estimate. There are some nuances to that number. So the best way to find that number is to look at your notice of assessment. And this is a sample notice of assessment. And you'll see there at the bottom right, you'll see your RSP deduction limit for the tax year that's applicable. So make sure to look at your tax documents, because that's what the government's going to be looking at when deciding how much you're allowed to put into your RSP.
Well, and if you'd like us to look at it with you, we'd be glad to, if you want to email a copy or just talk to us over the phone. We can look at that with you. Also, what makes up, so it's 18% of earned income, or whatever the government is saying at the bottom of that slip. That would be my first reference, is what the government is saying you can contribute in the bottom right-hand corner of that slip. But what makes up earned income?
Earned income is primarily salary income. It does not include investment income that you've earned. It's not rental income, for example. It's actual salary or commission income that you've generated throughout the year.
Anything else? What about rental income, for example?
Excluded. It does not. You cannot generate RSP room, contribution room, based on your rental income.
What if the rental income? My understanding is rental income through a company is actually deductible. So we might have to follow up on that, because I think there are circumstances in which rental income is deductible. What about anything else you can think of that people were wondering about for earned income? T4, rental income. I think there's some small things in regards to Canada Pension Plan, etc., but the biggest one being, of course, T4. We'll have to follow up on the rental income.
And you'll also have to, if you have a pension, you should be aware that there's a pension adjustment typically against that 18% contribution limit. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving pieces. Obviously, the gold standard is to consult your notice of assessment. And as Darren said, we're happy to do that with you.
Good. Is that fine? The two of us are sitting here and we're not sure about rental income. See, nothing's that simple. It seems simple at the surface, but it's not always. And so we'll definitely be checking on that rule. Well, talking about, so we've covered the tax-free savings account. We've covered the RSP. What should someone do first? The tax-free savings account or the RSP?
It's a question we get time and time again. And really it comes down to how much money you're making in the present day. So if you're not making a lot of money at the moment and you have some extra savings to sock away, your best bet is to start with the tax-free savings account. If you're in a very high income bracket, if you're making over $200,000, $220,000 a year, you're at the top rate. If it's not likely you'll be in that top rate in retirement, it makes so much sense to shelter that income today from tax and pay the tax at a lower rate in retirement. So in that case, start with your RSP.
Yeah, I've read again in some of the media that as a general rule, and of course you would want to A, consult to your accountant with a question like this, B, certainly talk to your advisor with a question like this, but I've read and heard that something like $40,000 is a general cutoff. So if your income is more than $40,000, makes sense to make an RSP contribution because you get an immediate tax refund. And of course, the money is growing tax deferred until you use it, which for many people is a very, very long time. So RSP first if your income is your T4 income, and we're not sure about rental income, is more than 40,000 and less than 40,000. Maybe you want to save up that RSP room so that when your income is higher, you can make a bigger deduction and get more tax refund.
Makes a lot of sense.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. So the third question we had today, so we had a number of questions about RSPs and TFSA. We sort of just combined them in that presentation. One of the other questions we had was about target date funds. And target date funds are funds that are designed to have your money available to you at a specific date and time. For example, you can buy target date funds where the target date is 2022, 2025, 2030. So target date means there's a year at which you're targeting to have that money available to you. These kind of funds are most appropriate. In fact, I quite agree with them in a fairly limited number of circumstances. One, they do well in registered educational savings plans. Why do I say registered educational savings plans? Well, clearly if your child is 2 years old now and you know that they're going to be, or you're hoping potentially that they'll go to university later in life, then you know what year they're likely going to start. So you'd want to have that money available to you then. Another spot where target date funds are at least common and popular is in defined contribution pension plans, because often those pension plans don't have a lot of investment alternatives to choose from. So because there's not a lot of alternatives, and you know that there's a good chance when you retire, that's when you'll want to use some of the money that's in that plan. So a target date fund could say, we want to target the year that you retire as the target date so that that money is available to you at that time. So Patrick, we did a little bit of a graphic here just to try to understand how these target date funds work and why for those purposes they might be useful.
All right.
Okay, good. So what you see with target date funds is, if you buy a target date fund up here earlier, let's say you want to buy a target date fund that's 2026. So we know you got lots of time. Well, it's not that much time anymore, is it? 7 years. Many of them go much longer than that. But when you start, there's a high portion of stocks. So that's this line, stocks. But as time passes, as we get closer to 2027, the amount of stocks that you own significantly reduce. When you start the plan, there's a certain amount of bonds, but as time passes and you get closer and closer to the target date, the number of bonds increase. And this whole process happens automatically for you. So there's nothing that you need to do. In other words, passive, maintenance free. You do have the advantage of owning stocks with the long-term investment horizon, but as you get towards your target date, the volatility, the risk in the portfolio is going to be quite low because you own a lot of bonds. So at a high level, it makes some sense because it's nice and easy. It's all done for you, automatic, and when the time comes that you need the money because you have such a low risk portfolio at that time, it makes sense that you're going to have a lot of bonds. Having said that, there are some reasons why I would suggest this strategy does have very limited use. Maybe I'll turn it over. You can take a rest from holding our chart there, Patrick, and we'll together bring up a few points as to why, while there's a place for target date funds, why they might not be your best choice, especially in an environment where you have more than a couple of investment options available to you.
Yeah, I would say for investors on the smaller side of the scale, it's a perfectly appropriate investment. Or if it's in your pension plan and the pension plan's a small portion of your net worth, it's a perfectly appropriate investment vehicle. One thing to be mindful of is because everything is done for you, the fees can get a little expensive. They do range anywhere from a modest 1.5% up to 2.5%. So it's important to look at the fund that you're considering buying and make sure you're keeping the costs under control.
Yeah, and the question that was sent to us was specifically addressing, well, how do these target date funds compare to a more stable index-related investment? And I think the comparison was the S&P 500?
Yes.
So that's a bit of a complex question at one level because number one, target date funds can be volatile at the beginning because you own a lot of stocks. Therefore, we couldn't call it stable at all. Although as time passes and you get lower volatility bonds, they will become more stable. But comparing that to something like the S&P 500, which is the basket of stocks in the United States, that's very volatile. And it's very volatile the whole way the entire time that you own that. So I'm not sure that it's a good comparison, the S&P 500 and a target date fund, because they're so different. One is all stocks all the time, and by the way, super, super inexpensive. Mm-hmm. Whereas target date funds are a combination of stocks and bonds. The volatility will change and reduce over time, though the cost stays the same, even though when you're getting more bonds. So the target date funds have quite a different, I would say, use than owning the S&P 500. It would satisfy an entirely different set of objectives, though neither one being, as I would say, especially early on, stable. Any other thoughts in terms of the target date funds and what makes them different than, say, buying a stable an index such as the S&P 500?
You know, what comes to mind is if you're trying to reduce volatility over time, if you want to really rein in the risk as you get older, it's if you're working with an advisor, you know, you can get a really low-cost solution, but you can get the amount of risk specific to your individual situation. So, you know, someone might be quite early on in their career, but they might need less volatility than a target date is allowing them to have. So by working with individual index funds, if you can work with a knowledgeable advisor, you can get that low cost, but you can actually make it specific, make the risk specific to you each and every year. It's not just a formula that'll automatically change without consideration for your individual circumstances. It's something that you can work with through a financial plan to customize the amount of risk on and risk on assets for yourself. So whatever works best for you.
Right. In other words, risk off being that bond low risk part, and risk on. So when we were showing that chart, risk off would have been that risk off would have been that blue line.
Right.
The blue line, the more risk off as you get closer to your date, and the risk on would have been the green line, and there's less risk as we get closer to the date. And the thing about target date funds is they make that adjustment every year. Whether it's really the best time to do that or not, they're still going to do it because that's the formula. Whereas if you manage risk off and risk on yourself, well, ideally with your advisor, you may find that having more control over exactly when you switch or reduce the risk on to more risk off, you end up with a better outcome.
That's right. You know, if the market's on sale and things have gone down quite a bit, you want to ride that wave of recovery to the upside. You don't want to be pigeonholed into a certain amount of risk just because of your age.
Right. Like, for example, in 2008, 2009, I would hate to have been in a target date funds that was selling my stocks at the bottom to increase the amount of bonds. And one of the number one mistake by research that investors make is selling at a bad time. So we always want to avoid anything that's going to cause us to be selling good quality things at a bad time. Anything else on target date
No, I
funds?
think that's it. And unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you very much for sending in your questions. We very much look forward to the next Ask Us Anything session next month. And we'll be in touch by email with an invitation for your questions.
Where is this do we post this on our Facebook?
We do. So it'll be on Facebook, it'll be on our website, our LinkedIn, our Twitter, YouTube, you name it.
What's our Facebook?
It's called the Farwell Group.
So like us on the Farwell group.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, okay. Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.